was just there and was able to, I guess, give a sense of what's on the ground. I guess a lot of people are now looking at the Israeli elections as the prism for discussion. I mean, certainly, you talk to people and they talk about this dramatic swing to the right. Haaretz, the sort of liberal, left liberal Israeli newspaper saying, never before has Israel's policies been based on such explicit hate. Never has hate been, as though the ideas, Israel had a sort of sudden dramatic increase to the right with the voting in of Lieberman and Netanyahu into power. And certainly and it's interesting that there has been a decrease in sort of the vote of some of Israel's faith-led parties, such as Labour, which lost 6 seats down from 19 to 13, and Meretz, the sort of like the other sort of left Zionist parties, moving down from 5 seats to 3. But in many respects, this doesn't actually change the fundamental situation that's occurring in Palestine. People should remember that Israel has just had its largest bombing, largest single day of bombing since 1967. The deaths of the sort of 220 in the sort of the first couple of days of the bombing of Gaza, and then 1,400 overall, which I won't go into sort of too much detail on. And we need to remember that those deaths were caused by this supposed centrist government of Kadima under Tzipi Livni. And we should also remember that Kadima itself, this supposed moderate party, was a split from Likud, and I'll get into some of that, why that split happened, etc. But that split comes from people like Ariel Sharon, who was prepared to talk about the getting rid of Al-Aqsa mosque to pave way for a new temple in Jerusalem. Was prepared to the sort of the stuff which sparked the Second Intifada. And when we talk about Israeli militarization and racism, we need to remember that every single leader of Israel, historically without exception, has been an officer in the army. Every single one. And I don't just mean in the sense of every Israeli serves in the army, but in the sense that every one of them was a high-ranking officer at the time before they moved into politics. The exception to that, that in terms of leaders, or attempted exceptions to that, was when I was there in 2006, when there was talk about Amir Peretz from the Labour Party getting in, who was from a trade union background. I say that term loosely because he comes from the Istarot, which is the sort of the Zionist trade union federation, which is designed to essentially exclude Palestinian labour from the workforce, and it's a very racist, not really a trade union setup in how we sort of understand it. But he was the one exception in terms of even candidates for leadership, and his policies towards the election were basically identical to everyone else's. And in talking about these elections, we should also remember that the new is that Netanyahu was the leader of Likud in government, just as Ehud Barak, the current leader of the Labour Party, was historically the Labour leader as well. So there's, so whilst you've got these, new leaders, they don't actually represent any sort of, devolution significantly from the sort of the ongoing racism of Israel. Right? The intensification and apartheidization of Israel is not the policy of Likud, Kadima, or Labour in and of themselves, but rather it's the policies of Israel, and we need to bear that in mind. Since 1967, Israel has been making a two-state solution increasingly difficult through its creation of the settlement expansions. In the 1980s, we saw as a resistance to that in terms of the First Intifada, and people opposing the occupation of Lebanon, particularly with the massacres in Sabra and Shatila, with rallies inside Israel in the hundreds of thousands. So there was some opposition in the 1980s which was able to drive the Oslo peace process. However, it should be noted that peace process, or supposed peace process, essentially intensified and solidified the occupation. Over the time of the 90s, the settlements doubled from about 200,000 to 400,000. Israel controlled land, developed control of land, sea, air borders, and also made restrictions on Palestinian resources, such as being unable to drill water below 600 metres below land level, meaning that most of the actual goods in Palestine ends up getting cut out and going straight to the settlements. With this essential intensification of the occupation, we saw that this sort of the start of the Second Intifada, and with the start of the Second Intifada, we saw, in some ways, the two most significant policies in cementing not only Israeli apartheid, but a move to a situation which is worse than apartheid in what we have now, those two being the wall and the ban of Palestinian labour from working inside Israel. So if you think, for the whole period up until the sort of the early 2000s period, whilst you had an occupation going on, whilst you had Palestinians treated as second-class citizens, all the rest of it, you actually had a situation where Palestinians could get permits to work in Israel. They were used as cheap labour inside Israel. Even Gazans could get sort of in and out, with these sort of regulated permits. Movement was controlled, restricted, etc. But with the wall and with the ban of Palestinian labour working inside Israel, a lot of that changed. Even if you look at places where the settlements had expanded, so take for instance a village I went to called Beit Sira, which is sort of between, I think it's between Bethlehem and Ramallah. Beit Sira, you had a settlement which came into right next to the Palestinian village, set up this huge Jewish-only town, but the settlers could come and go. In fact, the settlers actually went into the Palestinian village and shopped. They spent money in the Palestinian village. Palestinians, despite the fact that they had their land taken away, were actually, many of them were very generous in going, okay, well, we've lost our land, but we're still going to, your kids will play soccer with our kids, we'll have, have friendships sort of built up. And when I was there, it was interesting because the wall had been cut them off from these people since 2002. You still had Palestinians who were regularly bringing their friends in the settlement next door because they'd actually built up this friendship up until 2002. And in 2002, that separation essentially cemented sort of an alienation between these two people of, the total othering to the point where they can no longer see each other face to face, and the only real exchange between Israelis and Palestinians in the occupied territories comes through soldiers and checkpoints. And with this comes the Israeli propaganda offensive, and we can see this with things like the discussion around Palestinian terrorism and the Battle of Jenin in 2002. And so this talk about Palestinian resistance, which was totally repressed. Jenin was in some ways a watershed of because one, it showed Palestinians actually rising up, where 56 Palestinians were killed, but they also managed to fight and resist the invasion and killed 23 Israeli soldiers. But the footage from that was actually banned in Israel, and a lot of the stuff in there was repressed. You saw a situation where a couple of Israeli soldiers who supposedly stumbled into Ramallah and were lynched. It was suddenly the last Israelis who'd been in Ramallah.